So, morning Roger, here we are, mid-May, finding out what's happening with the weather, the climate, because I remember every time we talk at this time of year, you say now's the change point. So what's happening?
Exactly, this is the most critical month of the year in terms of our future climate, because most of the climate patterns we work with run from about June to May. So the climate year for most of Australia doesn't run with the calendar year, it runs a bit like the financial year actually. So it's because our climate's mostly driven with what happens in the Pacific Ocean. Even what happens in the Indian Ocean is driven by what's happened in the Pacific Ocean a little time beforehand. And the Pacific Ocean tends to phase lock from around about the end of May of one year to April the next year. Then it changes over, which could be quite dramatic, and then it settles down again. So it's a remarkable feature. So you can usually lock in your likely climate patterns by the indicators we're getting around about the end of May, sometimes mid-June, but often around about the end of May. And already we've got a fair idea of what's happening.
Okay. So I think I heard they talk about an SOI of -4 or something this morning. You and I have had a conversation in the last day or so when we were up at Beef 2015 about probabilities. So what are we looking at in terms of probabilities right now for either things to stay the same or things to change markedly into, say, a drier setting?
Well, assuming the SOI continues to drop through May, which is probably the most likely outcome, then that generally means, depending where you live in Australia, a number of things. One is fairly low rainfall probabilities for winter, spring and early summer. Low probabilities, 20%, maybe even less in some areas, down to 5% chance of getting a normal rainfall. That's mostly for eastern Australia, maybe even northeast Tasmania, and the Eyre Peninsula and parts of South Australia. West Australia often has its own rules, as you know. That occasionally there's some influence from this in Western Australia as well. But by and large, it tends to cut back our rainfall probability values to very low. Not impossible, but very low chances of getting just your normal rainfall. That's relative to your location. That's the first thing it does. Secondly, especially north of about Nyngan, those areas, it gives you a high probability of a late frost, damaging frost. So if you can get through the droughty type pattern, quite often you can get a late frost come through around about October, September, October, right on anthesis for the wheat crop. So that's not a good, wheat or chickpeas, that's not a good look. And of course this pattern usually goes through summer as well, so that can delay the onset of the wet season, make the wet season in northern Australia a lot weaker than normal. So that's not good news for our graziers who've had a couple of years of this sort of pattern already. Some areas have picked up some good rain in autumn, as often happens. You can get a little burst of rain, or big bursts of rain in the autumn period, especially in eastern New South Wales, southern Queensland, exactly as it happened this year. And if it got into the Darling Downs, there's good subsoil moisture around there. So some areas be all right, regardless if we have a dry winter, which is the most likely outcome. Because of the subsoil and this burst of rain we get in autumn. But as often happens, as John Bielka Peterson reminded me a couple of years ago, 20 years ago, most of our droughts start and end with a flood. And so some areas have had a flood already, and that's oddly enough in Australia, that's the way it goes. So we get a burst of rain in autumn, gives a lot of perhaps false hope, but often it's the last rain you get, you don't get any follow-up. So it depends where you are. Again, this varies regionally, locally, so that needs, if you're somewhere else, it might need a different analysis, and it needs updating every month because little quirks in the system. El Nino Southern Oscillation is not our only climate system, there's about 10 of them, so they all have their little role to play, and that might help in some areas. Some of those other patterns might help. So all in all, it's not looking the best season for most folks, but there's interesting little opportunities that are in there as well. In this type of year, a late sorghum crop in Queensland, northern New South Wales, can often do quite well. A late sown crop, not an early sorghum crop, a late sorghum crop. So you plant late, not early. Late because we can still get summer storms. These sort of systems don't have much impact on our late spring, summer thunderstorm activity. So if you can get your place under some of those storms, you can often pick up a good sorghum crop. So it's not all bad. Depends whether you've got short fallow, long fallow, all these sorts of things. But a summer sorghum crop, if planted late, in the type of year we're going into, can often do quite well. But not an early sorghum crop, based on the sort of analyses we've been doing for the last 20 or 30 years in this area. For the sugar industry, North of Townsville, they like these type of years because they still get enough rainfall, but they get heaps of good solar radiation and incident radiation and so on to give them good yield and CCS levels. Coming further south, they might have irrigation problems. So again, it depends which industry you're in and where you're located, and every little region has its own interesting peculiarities. Northern Territory, for example, doesn't get impacted anywhere near as badly as Queensland does in this sort of pattern. So there's some interesting, for the graziers, so there's some interesting little sidelights there.
Okay. So if we say and I guess I'll summarise in layman's terms, we're talking about a probability of a much drier pattern. Yeah. We're talking about more severe late frost in that September-October period. We're talking about the prospect of still reasonable storms and things like that in summer.
Still get storms in the storm-prone areas such as the Darling Downs or northeast New South Wales, for example. That gets them through quite often. That's why it's good country. But we can still get storms that aren't impacted by this. And of course, the dry pattern would probably more likely start as we get further into winter. We can still pick up some what I would call relief rain between now and the end of June, something like that. But after that, it's probably more of a problem.
Well, okay. So I guess the third thing that we often move on to is what does that mean from a management point of view? So I guess you've just described the sugar industry, which in a nutshell you probably have covered off. We've talked about, say, late sorghum crops and things as being maybe an ideal. There's extremely high prices for chickpeas at the moment, and I guess the question is to what extent would there be risk for people who are thinking about chickpeas, for example. I think maybe what you're saying is from a grazing perspective, things are probably going to stay much the same as they have been, which is a bit of a significant worry.
Yes, there's no end in sight to that, I'm afraid, at this stage.
So I guess from a decision support point of view or decision-making point of view, do you have any, like, if I ask you to think out loud about, say, cotton, grain, I guess we've covered sugar, I guess we've covered grazing and maybe horticulture.
Yeah, I think a conservative approach everywhere, especially if you're dry land cotton. And irrigation allocations will probably be low this year. The stream flow is very much affected. Water flow down the main rivers can be severely impacted. If you've got plenty of subsoil moisture on a long fallow, then things like chickpeas would be a good bet. But beware of the frost issue, because these years can give you the double whammy of low rainfall, and if you still get through that through good management, you can still get a frost. So you somehow have to weigh that up. Sure. In maybe how much is planted and so on. For sugar, another good point, I guess, sugar seems to prefer these type of years. There's very little risk of not being able to harvest the crop. Very little risk of delayed harvesting and all those transport issues and so on. So it's, if you like, it's exactly the opposite type of year to a year like 2010. We had too much rain and did a lot of harm to the sugar industry, but everyone else had heaps of rain, perhaps too much in some areas. We've got exactly the opposite type of pattern in the Pacific. The Americans aren't saying whether or not there's going to be an El Nino. They're saying that there's a 70 or 80% chance of the current El Nino continuing. So it's not a matter of if it's going to develop or not. It's a matter of it continuing. So and that gets updated in another couple of days. So keep an update on this, because it depends on your local circumstances. You've got plenty of subsoil moisture in the right sort of soils. It's probably a good bet. You still get through. You still pick up some showers. Sure. It doesn't mean you get rid of all rain altogether, depending on where you are. And other factors might make southern New South Wales, northern Victoria a bit worse off than others this time. So again, it's a regional perspective. The local guys there, if they're switched on to some of this stuff, will probably be able to help there. Okay. But a pretty conservative approach in the cattle and wool industry, I'd say. Sheep industry. And
horticulture, any thoughts?
Well, you get plenty of sunshine these sort of years, so watch out for a bit of sunburn as you get into on some of the crops. It tends to be a frosty, cold type of year, but at least hailstorms and things like that are reduced in places like the Granite Belt in this particular type of year. So that's a bit of good news there as well.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, Roger, that's a good I guess, summary about this position in sort of mid-May. So I guess we'll stay tuned and see what unfolds.
Yeah, another month's time would be good.
And talk more.
Okay.
Thank you indeed.
Yeah.